The neon lights of Las Vegas blur into a haze of electric colors as I shuffle through the casino floor, the clatter of chips and the hum of the crowd forming a cacophonous symphony. My name is Rachel, and I deal cards at the Mirage, a bustling, glamorous place where the stakes are high and reality often seems to take a back seat to fantasy. Tonight, though, something feels off. I catch sight of him, Darren, the new magician. He's an enigma wrapped in a sharp suit and a crooked smile. His entrance is like a shadow slipping through a crack in the lights, unnoticed by most, but I can't seem to shake the feeling that he's watching me. He's a showstopper, that's for sure. With a flick of his wrist and a murmur of words that seem to hang in the air, Darren performs a trick. A card vanishes, reappearing in someone's hand. The crowd applauds, but my applause is hesitant. There's something unnerving about the way he looks at me when he performs. It's as though he's not just showing off a trick, but sending a message. As the night goes on, I try to brush off my discomfort, but Darren's presence lingers in my mind like a whisper. I'm left wondering if it's just the effect of the constant sensory overload or if there's something more sinister at play. Either way, I can't shake the feeling that tonight's entertainment might be more than it seems. It's been a few nights since Darren's arrival, and his tricks are becoming a regular fixture. Each time he performs, it's like the air changes, growing heavy with a strange tension. At first, I dismissed it as nerves or just the allure of his mystique. But as his illusions grow more elaborate, so do my doubts. Last night, he performed a trick that I can't quite forget. He made a coin disappear, and I swear, it felt like the space where it was supposed to be had folded in on itself. The room seemed to shift, though no one else seemed to notice. I couldn't help but feel a chill, a shiver that didn't fit with the warm glow of the casino lights. Then came the card trick. Darren's gaze was locked on me as he performed, his eyes glinting with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the facade of reality. He showed me a deck of cards, shuffled them with a flourish, and then, with a single, practiced gesture, revealed my card, a card I had never seen before, but one that felt oddly familiar. It was as if he had somehow plucked it from my own thoughts. I tried to laugh it off, to convince myself it was just a clever trick. But as I walked home through the neon-lit streets, Darren's eyes seemed to follow me, and the illusion he wove lingered in my mind. The line between reality and illusion is becoming harder to define, and I can't shake the sense that there's more to Darren's magic than meets the eye. It's been a week since Darren first caught my eye, and his presence has become a constant, unsettling fixture in my life. His illusions are no longer just tricks, they're infiltrating my reality, warping my sense of what's real and what's not. Yesterday, during a shift at the casino, Darren performed a trick that left me feeling disoriented. He pulled a coin from behind someone's ear. Simple, right? But when he handed it to me, I could have sworn it was the same coin he used a week ago. The same one that disappeared into thin air. I tried to ignore the creeping sensation that the coin felt colder than it should, almost as if it had been somewhere else before reaching my hand. Later that evening, things took a turn for the worse. Darren's magic began to affect more than just my perception. I found myself struggling to focus on my job. The cards in my hand seemed to shift and blur, and I started doubting whether I was dealing them correctly. It wasn't just a matter of nerves. Something about Darren's illusions was seeping into my reality, causing tangible effects. I began making mistakes that were out of character for me, and the casino's patrons noticed. Whispers of my inaccuracy reached the management, and I felt my confidence crumble. By the end of the night, as I walked to my car, I noticed an unusual number of people staring at me. Their eyes seemed to follow my every move, and the streetlights flickered in an almost rhythmic pattern, as if they were part of Darren's latest trick. I felt an overwhelming sense of paranoia and anxiety, unable to distinguish whether I was simply stressed or if Darren's influence was reaching into every corner of my life. The days blend into one another, each one bringing new, unsettling experiences. Darren's illusions are no longer confined to the casino. They begin to seep into my personal life, and I feel like I'm losing control of my own sanity. Last night, I was at home, trying to unwind after another exhausting shift. I poured myself a glass of wine and flipped through a magazine, but the images on the pages seemed to distort and shift before my eyes. Words turned into meaningless scribbles, and I had to blink repeatedly to force my vision back to normal. Each blink felt like I was closing my eyes on an alternate reality that Darren had created. I tried to reach out for help, but whenever I mentioned Darren, people looked at me with concern but brushed off my fears as stress-related paranoia. My friends and coworkers suggest I take some time off, but I'm afraid that stepping away might only make things worse. I can't escape the feeling that Darren's illusions are purposefully crafted to invade every part of my life, making me question not just the magic but my own grasp on reality. The more I try to fight it, the worse it gets. I found myself unable to perform basic tasks, misplacing keys, forgetting appointments. My reflection in the mirror seems to mock me, as though it's a mere illusion itself. The line between reality and Darren's tricks has become so blurred that I don't know what's real anymore. I'm trapped in a nightmare where even the simplest parts of my life feel like they're under his control. The tension in the casino is palpable as I face Darren for what I hope will be the final showdown. I've been preparing for this moment, gathering every ounce of courage and clarity I can muster. The casino is buzzing with activity, but for me, the world has narrowed to this confrontation. Darren's eyes gleam with a mix of amusement and menace as he approaches, his movements smooth and deliberate. "Rachel," he says, his voice a silky purr that seems to wrap around me. "You've come to challenge my illusions?" I nod, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Yes. I've had enough. I know what you're doing to me, and I'm not going to let you control my reality any longer." Darren's smile widens, and he performs a series of rapid-fire tricks, cards fluttering, coins vanishing and reappearing. Each trick is more elaborate than the last, and I can feel the weight of his power pressing down on me. I try to focus on the tricks, searching for a pattern or weakness that I can exploit. Suddenly, Darren's gaze locks onto mine, and I'm enveloped in a whirlwind of colors and shapes. The world around me twists and distorts, and I struggle to maintain my footing. My heart races as I realize that Darren is using every ounce of his skill to keep me trapped in his illusion. But I refuse to be a passive participant. Drawing on everything I've learned about Darren's tricks, I use my own understanding of illusions to fight back. I focus on the details, the flickers of light, the patterns and the shadows. Slowly, I start to unravel the layers of deception he's built around me. As Darren's illusions begin to falter, his confidence wavers. I see a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, and I press my advantage, determined to break free from his control. The confrontation with Darren leaves me drained, but victorious. The casino's lights seem dimmer now, and the once overwhelming buzz of activity feels muted. As I walk away from the scene, the weight of Darren's illusions lifts, but the impact of his manipulation remains. I'm left to deal with the aftermath of our encounter. Darren is nowhere to be found. His absence is as eerie as his presence was unsettling. The casino staff and patrons seem oblivious to the gravity of what happened, their normal routines unaffected by the chaos that unfolded. I return to my apartment, a place that now feels both familiar and foreign. The reflection in the mirror, once a source of dread, now seems to hold a semblance of reality. Yet, I know the scars of Darren's illusions will linger. My sense of self has been tested, and I'm left to piece together the fragments of my life. As I sit down to reflect on what happened, I realize that Darren's influence may not be entirely gone. There's a lingering feeling, a subtle reminder that his tricks might have left a permanent mark on my psyche. I can't shake the thought that other victims could be out there, or that his methods might inspire new threats. I'm left with questions and a newfound wariness of the world. The illusion of control is a powerful thing, and while I may have escaped Darren's grasp, the experience has changed me forever. I close my eyes, hoping that the next chapter of my life will be free from the shadows of his dark magic, but aware that the lessons learned will always linger. The excitement of moving into a new house had barely worn off when I first noticed something wasn't quite right. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a new beginning in this charming, secluded home on the outskirts of town. The realtor had sold me on the idea of tranquility and privacy, and for the first few days, it seemed perfect. The house itself was a classic, a large, white two-story with a wraparound porch and gabled roof. From the outside, it was everything I'd hoped for. But as the days passed, the small oddities began. It started with a creak in the hallway floorboards at night, just a faint, unsettling sound that made me pause. Then there were the shadows that seemed to dance at the edge of my vision. The house felt too quiet at times, the sort of silence that presses in on you, making every noise sound louder. Objects I was certain I'd left in one place were found elsewhere, and a chill seemed to follow me, no matter how warm I kept the house. It was unsettling, but I told myself it was just the adjustment to a new place, that my mind was playing tricks on me. As I unpacked the last of the boxes, I tried to ignore the feeling that the house was watching me, that the walls themselves might be hiding something I couldn't quite grasp. I shook off the unease, thinking it would pass. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. It wasn't long before the small disturbances turned into a pattern, a relentless rhythm that gnawed at my sanity. The creaking floors became more frequent, almost as if someone was walking through the house when I wasn't looking. At night, the strange noises grew louder and more persistent, footsteps in the dark, whispers I couldn't quite understand. One evening, after a long day at work, I came home to find the living room in disarray. A lamp that had been on the side table was now on the floor, its shade cracked. I was sure I'd left it where it was supposed to be. A sense of dread settled over me as I bent to pick up the pieces. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to calm down. I had to be imagining things. The house was old, perhaps it was just settling. The real turning point came one night when I woke to a faint, cold draft in my bedroom. The window was open, despite having been securely shut before I went to sleep. I checked the locks, finding them intact, but the unease lingered. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had forgotten to close the window properly. But as the days went by, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Each time I tried to ignore the incidents, they seemed to escalate. Objects seemed to move on their own, and the shadows grew darker. I felt like I was losing control, like the house itself was alive and had turned against me. It was as if something, or someone, was playing a cruel game, and I was the unwilling participant. The discovery of the surveillance cameras was a jarring wake-up call. I had been cleaning out the attic when I stumbled upon a small, dusty box tucked away in a corner. Inside, I found several hidden cameras, their lenses glinting ominously in the dim light. I felt a cold sweat break out as I realized that someone had been watching me in my own home. My first reaction was denial. These must be old, forgotten gadgets from the previous owner. I had to convince myself that this was just a misunderstanding. But the more I inspected the cameras, the more I found, each one hidden in increasingly bizarre places. They were everywhere, behind bookshelves, and light fixtures, and even in the air vents. Panic set in as I imagined the implications. My private moments, my everyday routines, all recorded and monitored by someone who had intruded upon my sanctuary. I felt a growing sense of violation that was hard to shake. Each time I looked around the house, I imagined hidden eyes peering back at me from every corner. I called the police, but their response was dismissive. They told me that without evidence of an immediate threat or someone actively breaking into the house, there was little they could do. They suggested I check with a professional to see if there were any breaches in the security system or other technical details I might have missed. Desperately, I tried to trace the camera's connections. The more I investigated, the more I felt trapped in a web of paranoia. I began to wonder if I was losing my mind. Every creak in the house, every flicker of shadow, seemed to mock my growing fear. I was left with the sinking realization that my home was no longer a safe place, and the walls felt closer than ever. As the days passed, the situation worsened. The surveillance became more invasive, and the intruder's methods grew increasingly disturbing. I found messages scrawled in places I hadn't seen before, on the backs of pictures and the margins of my books. The messages were cryptic and menacing, suggesting that the intruder knew my every move and was always one step ahead. I felt like I was trapped in a twisted game, with rules I couldn't understand. The sense of paranoia was overwhelming. I started to question everyone around me, neighbors, co-workers, even the delivery people. Every interaction felt tainted by the possibility of hidden motives or secret knowledge about my situation. One night, I woke to find my front door ajar. My heart raced as I rushed downstairs, fearing the worst. The door was locked again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in the house. I checked every room, every closet, but found no one. The house was eerily silent, as if holding its breath. In my frantic search for answers, I discovered hidden microphones in the house, amplifying the sense of violation. They captured every whisper, every breath, and the feeling of being constantly monitored was suffocating. I started to lose sleep, my nerves frayed and my patience thin. Desperate, I decided to confront the intruder. I left a note in plain sight, challenging them to reveal themselves. My heart pounded as I waited for a response, knowing it might be a dangerous move. The silence that followed was deafening, and my anxiety reached a breaking point. I was on edge, knowing that any moment could bring another chilling revelation or confrontation. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. I had barely managed to catch a few hours of restless sleep when I heard a noise in the middle of the night, a soft scraping sound from the attic. My heart leapt into my throat as I grabbed a flashlight and crept up the stairs. The air was thick with tension, each step echoing in the silent house. When I reached the attic, I found a figure hunched over a makeshift control station. The screens flickered with live feeds from the cameras hidden throughout my house. The person turned, and I was met with a familiar face, a former colleague, someone I had barely interacted with, but who had a history of being obsessed with security and technology. They turned to me with a cold, almost detached expression. "I knew you'd eventually figure it out." The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just a random invasion, it was personal. This individual had been tracking my every move, driven by a twisted sense of control and vengeance. The antagonist explained how they had been monitoring me, citing past grievances and perceived slights as their motivation. I was stunned, struggling to comprehend how someone I barely knew could harbor such intense animosity. The revelation added a disturbing layer to my fear. It wasn't just a stranger invading my privacy, it was someone who knew me in a way I had never imagined. The final confrontation unfolded with a chaotic blend of fear and determination. As my former colleague revealed their plan to turn my life into a living nightmare, I realized I had to act quickly. The control station was filled with monitors showing every part of my house, each screen a reminder of my invasion. I grabbed a heavy object from the attic and moved silently towards them. My breath was ragged as I approached, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The antagonist was absorbed in the monitors, giving me a small window of opportunity. I swung the object with all my strength, knocking them to the ground. In the ensuing struggle, the antagonists tried to maintain control over their twisted game, but their grip faltered. I managed to secure them with a rope I found in the attic, my hands shaking with the weight of the situation. The struggle left me exhausted, but I felt a grim sense of relief as I realized I had regained control over my home, at least for now. I called the police, and by the time they arrived, the antagonist was in custody. They looked at me with a mix of anger and satisfaction, their plans foiled but their motives laid bare. The house, once again, fell into an uneasy silence. The walls seemed to exhale a sigh of relief, but I knew the scars of this invasion would remain with me. I never expected my solo hike through the Highlands to end like this, a frantic race against a storm while a disoriented stranger stumbled into my path. The wind howled through the desolate landscape, carrying with it a biting cold that seemed to seep into my bones. The sky, once a pale gray, had darkened into a churning mass of black clouds, unleashing a torrential downpour that made every step a struggle. I was navigating a narrow, treacherous path when I spotted him, an unnervingly still figure against the backdrop of the storm. At first, I thought he might be a mirage, conjured by the storm's fury. But as I drew closer, his form became clearer, though his clothes were drenched and his face obscured by a sodden hood. "Hey!" I called out, my voice barely cutting through the wind. "Are you all right?" He looked up, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. I'm lost," he stammered. His voice was strained, and I could barely make out his words over the roar of the storm. "Can you help me?" I hesitated, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. There was something off about him, something I couldn't quite place. Despite my unease, I nodded. "Come with me. We need to find shelter." As we moved, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The stranger's story was inconsistent. One moment he claimed he had been hiking alone for days, the next he spoke of meeting friends. His eyes darted nervously, and he seemed to struggle with even the simplest of tasks, like walking steadily. Despite my growing suspicion, I led him towards a makeshift shelter I'd used in previous hikes, a small cave hidden by a tangle of underbrush. The storm was relentless, battering the landscape and forcing us into close quarters. Once inside, I studied him more closely. His clothes, mud-streaked and torn, seemed familiar. As I glanced at the small, distinguishing details, I couldn't shake the uneasy recognition. They resembled those of a local climber who had vanished years ago. The cave was small and cramped, but it provided a temporary refuge from the storm. I sat across from the stranger, my mind racing. I tried to make sense of the conflicting details in his story. The wind howled outside, and every gust seemed almost to be mocking the fragile trust one was trying to extend. "You said you've been lost for days?" I began, trying to sound casual despite the unease gnawing at me. "Why didn't you contact anyone for help?" He looked at me, his eyes darting nervously. I didn't have my phone with me. It was in my bag, and I lost that somewhere in the storm." I frowned, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. "You're sure you didn't have any other contact with people? No one else knows you're out here?" His gaze dropped to the floor, and he muttered something unintelligible. I could see him struggling to keep his story straight. The inconsistencies were piling up. One moment he spoke of being alone, the next he mentioned vague acquaintances. The storm outside showed no sign of letting up. The wind shrieking seemed almost to be mocking the fragile trust one was trying to extend. My mind kept returning to the clothes he wore, a heavy, waterproof jacket that matched the description of the missing climber's gear. A cold dread settled over me as I realized the implications of what I had discovered. I tried to maintain a calm exterior. "I'm going to try and get us out of here once the storm dies down. For now, let's just wait it out." He nodded, but I could see the fear in his eyes. It mirrored my own. I couldn't shake the feeling that this man, whoever he was hiding something. And as the storm raged on outside, I knew that figuring out what was true and what was a lie was going to be crucial to our survival. Hours seemed to stretch endlessly within the confines of the cave, the storm outside relentless and unforgiving. I huddled near the entrance, trying to keep warm, while the stranger paced anxiously, his movements erratic. I kept glancing at him, trying to piece together the puzzle that was rapidly becoming more complex. At one point, he slumped against the cave wall, seemingly exhausted. I took this opportunity to examine the small bag he had with him. It was battered and stained, but I noticed a familiar logo, a logo I had seen on the missing climber's jacket. My heart raced as I realized the implications. I had to know more, so I decided to confront him. "Listen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need you to tell me the truth. Your clothes, they're from a climber who went missing years ago. What's going on?" He looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. For a moment, he seemed at a loss for words. Then, he began to speak, his voice trembling. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just lost. Please, you have to believe me." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's not just your clothes. You've been giving me different stories. I need to understand who you really are." The stranger's face contorted in a mixture of fear and frustration. He seemed to be wrestling with himself, and for a brief moment, I thought he might break down entirely. Instead, he muttered something under his breath, too quiet for me to catch. The words, though, felt like a chilling omen. Suddenly, he stood up and moved towards the cave's entrance, his movements quick and unsteady. "I need to get out of here." "I can't stay," he said. Before I could stop him, he pushed through the entrance, braving the storm once more. I followed, heart pounding, the rain and wind hitting me like a barrage of cold needles. The visibility was near zero, and I struggled to keep up with him. As I drew closer, I noticed a faint glow in the distance, something that did not belong in the natural landscape. It was as though the stranger was leading me towards something hidden. The storm was now a raging beast, its fury nearly blinding me as I stumbled after the stranger. The wind howled and the rain pelted my face with an unrelenting force. Each step felt like a battle against nature itself, and the realization that I was chasing someone who might have sinister motives added a layer of dread to my struggle. We fought against the storm's violence, slipping on the muddy terrain and struggling to maintain our footing. The stranger moved with a frantic urgency, his path erratic and unpredictable. I tried to call out to him, but my voice was swallowed by the wind's deafening roar. Suddenly, he stopped and turned, his eyes wild with fear. "We have to get away from here," he shouted, barely audible over the storm. "They're coming for us." The words made little sense, but the panic in his voice was palpable. I felt my own fear escalating as I tried to make sense of the situation. The stranger was leading me into increasingly treacherous terrain, sharp rocks and uneven ground that made each step a dangerous gamble. "Stop!" I yelled, my voice cracking. "What are you talking about?" He ignored me, pushing on as if driven by an unseen force. My concern for my safety grew as the storm's ferocity seemed to intensify. The path we were on was becoming nearly impassable, and I could feel my strength waning. The combination of physical exhaustion and psychological strain was beginning to take its toll. Just as I was about to collapse, I saw a faint, flickering light in the distance. It was the same glow I had noticed earlier, but now it seemed closer, almost within reach. The stranger, however, seemed to have lost sight of it, consumed by his own frantic fears. With a final, desperate effort, I caught up to him and grabbed his arm. "We need to find shelter. We can't keep going like this." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of desperation and confusion. For a moment, he seemed to hesitate, but then he nodded. Together, we struggled back towards the cave, the storm still raging around us. The brief respite of the cave seemed like a distant memory, but it was our only option for survival. As we reached the cave's entrance, I couldn't shake the feeling that the stranger's fear was not just a reaction to the storm, but something far more unsettling. The storm's rage mirrored the turmoil within me, and I knew that whatever secrets the stranger was hiding would soon come to light. The storm outside still raged with unrelenting force. The stranger's revelation had left me shaken, but there was little time to process it. The storm was taking its toll, and the cave offered only a temporary refuge from the chaos outside. As the hours dragged on, I tried to keep us warm and dry, but the storm showed no signs of letting up. The stranger sat in a corner, his face a mask of despair. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story than he had revealed, but now was not the time for further confrontations. When the storm finally began to abate, I ventured outside to assess our situation. The landscape was battered and unrecognizable, with debris scattered everywhere. The sky was still overcast, and the air was heavy with the remnants of the storm. I returned to the cave to find the stranger quietly packing what little he had left. "We need to move," he said quietly. "I don't know what's out there, but it's not safe here." I nodded, and together we began the arduous task of navigating the devastated landscape. The trail back to civilization was treacherous, and every step was a struggle. The stranger's presence was a constant reminder of the unresolved questions and the danger that still lurked in the shadows. As we made our way through the highlands, the sense of relief at the storm's end was tempered by the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The stranger's past was a shadow that hung over us, and I couldn't help but wonder about the true nature of his involvement in the missing climber's case. By the time we reached the edge of the highlands, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the landscape. I glanced back at the rugged terrain we had traversed, feeling a mix of exhaustion and relief. The immediate danger was over, but the encounter had left its mark. We parted ways as we reached the outskirts of civilization. The stranger's final words were a mix of gratitude and regret. "Thank you for your help," he said. "I hope you find what you're looking for." As I watched him disappear into the distance, I couldn't shake the feeling that our encounter had changed something in me. The storm and the stranger's secrets had revealed more than just physical dangers. They had exposed the fragility of trust and the complexity of human nature. Like the story? Hit like and subscribe. See you in the next story popping up on your screen at this exact moment.